Hello and good morning, everybody. How are we doing? This is Jeremiah, and we are having another fabulous webinar. This time we're talking about hatches. Hatches are pretty amazing, right? They're very, it's interesting in looking at, CAD problems that different disciplines have, by, your typical searching the forums for a particular solution to a problem or something. But I know, back in the day, we were just first switching over to CAD. Hatches were really confounding for us. And as we tried to find information, it just seemed it's very kind of specific to landscape architecture. It just seems like these other disciplines are certainly not having to deal with as many hatches. And dealing with hatches in CAD is a pain. I'm just going to flat out say it is. So we're going to show you kind of how we deal with hatches and just kind of a little bit of everything. If you're definitely going to learn something about hatches, even if you are a 100% expert. So we're going to show you a little bit of everything of what hatches are and how we deal with them and you name it. Best practices, how to save them, the whole gamut. It's going to be a great webinar. So grab your popcorn and get ready. You are going to want to notice there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Stands for questions and answers. And if you click that right now, you can get that box situated on the screen. Makes it a little quicker for you to type a question to us, but also note you're going to be able to see the answers that we type to other people's questions because you're here with us live on this little journey. And even though it is live, it's also being recorded. Look at that. We thought of everything. So this will be up on the website later today for you to share with all your friends who couldn't make it. So, hey, enough of my yammer. I'm going to get this hand over to James, who's going to take it away.
Good morning. Thanks, Jer, for that intro. Like he said, my name is James. I do a little bit of a lot of things here at Land Effects, and this hatch project has been something that I've had my head buried in for quite some time. I've shed a lot of blood, sweat, and mostly tears on this project. So I'm actually really excited to share this with you today. So without further ado, let's jump right in. First, we're going to cover an intro here with a quick overview of what we're going to discuss today. Then we'll jump into a little bit more detail on each of these points before we hop over to a demonstration to run through it all. So definitely get those questions ready if you have them. First, we're going to cover just what is a hatch in its most basic form. A hatch is made up of three major components, and we'll talk about each of these in depth. But the key takeaway for the moment is you need a .pat or a pattern file, a hatch slide or a .sld file, and an XML. Like I said, we'll discuss all these in good detail, but just have that in your back pocket for now that there's three main components that make up a hatch in AutoCAD. We're going to discuss AutoCAD hatches, kind of how AutoCAD deals with hatches, and then how we at Land Effects approached the problem and added our own functionality and utility and kind of how we do things a little bit different than the default AutoCAD ways. That's going to lead us into where hatches are stored, understanding the file structure and kind of behind the scenes of what's going on with hatches. By wrapping your head around this, it'll help you understand what the system is doing and give you a better base of knowledge in order to use hatches in the system. We'll take a look at some of the good hatch tools, some of our favorites. These have great utility that go far beyond what AutoCAD does with hatches. This is going to be a fun topic to cover. I'm excited to do that. And we will cover how to save your own custom hatches. So if you have hatches from whatever source, whether you found them on the internet, made them yourself, or had them made, we'll show you how to integrate those hatches in with our Land Effects hatches. It's also worth noting that you can take any existing Land Effects or AutoCAD hatch that's already in the system and tweak it to your preferences and save that as your own custom hatch as well. Then we're going to talk about how to reshoot a hatch slide. This will make more sense when we get into the demonstration, but slides can be finicky depending on your setup, and it's sometimes tricky to get the slides just the way you want them the first try. So what we're going to do is we're going to save a hatch in with an intentionally bad slide to show you how easy it is to remedy that so there's no stress involved with it. All right, so let's start with what is a hatch. Well, here's the standard definition of a hatch. A hatch pattern or a solid fill that is automatically generated within a closed boundary to identify parts of a drawing. If you've worked with hatches before, you're likely familiar that they're commonly used to represent areas and volumes, things like ground covers, sod, mulch, you name it. They can also be used for aesthetic purposes to add detail to something, and they are definitely really useful in details. There's so many applications for hatches. So understanding these is going to be to your benefit for sure. Like we said, the components of a hatch are an XML file. This is arguably the most important. You can kind of think of this as the brain of the hatch. It's going to tell the system what to do with the hatch, and it's going to contain information such as rotation and scale settings. Then we have the pattern file or the .pat file. This is going to be simply a text file full of numbers, but it's important to understand that a hatch is not just a repeating image. The system actually reads the pattern file and generates the hatch. So the XML file and the pat file work together to tell the system how to generate the hatch when needed. And then lastly, we need a slide. The reason we need a slide is because there's no good way to view a hatch pattern until you place it. Since there is no image, there's nothing really to see. So in order to have a good slide, we need to create one. AutoCAD hatches versus land effects hatches. AutoCAD hatches use a single .pat file. It's named acad.pat. They have all of their pattern files in one large chunky pattern .pat file. This is not the most efficient way to do things. It results in one single location for all of your hatch patterns. So when you go to troubleshoot or edit or add custom hatches, it's not the ideal way to do things. We urge you not to do this. The reason I say that is because if you were to look up AutoCAD's documentation for saving your own custom hatches in, they recommend that you copy and paste them into their single pat file, that acad.pat file, and it's just not the smartest way to go about it. So what we're going to discuss today, as well as land effects hatches and kind of what we do differently and how we approach things. First of all, we have individual pat files for each hatch. This is going to make organizing and managing and everything just so much more simple. It's going to allow us to organize our hatches into libraries. So we have three or more than three, but the three major libraries that we want to be aware of are going to be our site, our ground cover, and our detail hatches. There's also drip hatches, but those have other data, so we're not going to focus on them today. But the point here is that we can break hatches up by type and organize them into individual libraries, which makes sorting through them, finding the hatch that you want, so much easier and cleaner to work with. I also want to note that all of our land effects hatches include the AutoCAD defaults. So if you're familiar with working with the default AutoCAD hatches, you don't need to worry. Those are included and we've added them to our system as well. So all of the benefits that you get with our custom hatches, you can use with the AutoCAD hatches as well. One really nice thing about our hatch system is that our hatches will automatically scale. It's worth noting that there's no default scale system set up for hatches in AutoCAD. For example, if you have a hatch that's working ideally in the way you want it, and let's say for an example, its scale is set to 1, if you apply that scale of 1 to another hatch, it could be completely different. So we've gone through and taken great efforts to go through every single hatch and optimize its scale so that when it places, it's scaled automatically. These will scale in both model space and paper space, and the way that we've set them up is so that they look legible and ideal when printing at a 1 to 20 scale. That doesn't mean you're locked into our scale by any means, but at least you can rest assured knowing that when you place a hatch, it's going to be usable and you can adjust it from there. And we'll go through all of this, of course, when we jump into the demonstration side of things. We want to wrap our heads around where hatches are stored and kind of familiarize ourselves with the folder structures. First, AutoCAD hatches, like we said, are stored in that acad.pat file. and it is buried. It's even in a hidden folder. They put it at the end of this really long file path, and if you are not aware of this file path, it can be really tricky to find. Um, so then we'll also discuss land effects hatches and how we store them. We've simplified things greatly, but there are a few things you want to be aware of. All of the .pat files are going to be stored in our land effects patterns folder. So that's pretty straightforward. XMLs are going to be stored in the land effects hatches folder. And then lastly, the slides are going to be stored in that same hatches folder, but within their respective library. The reason that the slides are stored in their library folder is because one pattern file can represent a hatch in multiple instances. So you can have multiple instances of the same pattern file with different scale and rotation settings across libraries, or even more than one version in a library. And we'll definitely cover that in detail. I know this slide can be a bit dry or daunting when you're just looking at file paths, but we're going to walk through all this so that it makes a lot more sense. Hatch tools. We're going to begin with the AutoCAD hatch tool, the basic place hatch tool. There's nothing wrong with this. In fact, we're going to be using it for some utility purposes, but it definitely has its limitations and drawbacks. So then we're going to begin there, and then we'll go into some of the land effects hatch tools and show you how we've kind of improved upon it and uh, taken our own twist to the issue and added so much new functionality. We'll go through our default or generic hatch libraries and kind of cover how that mirrors what we were looking at in the folder structure. We'll show you how to use the print hatches tool. This tool is really amazing. It has so much utility. It allows you to basically run print hatches on a hatch library that you specify, and it will generate layout pages with all of the hatches displayed on content binder pages, and you'll be able to see all of the hatches in one place and compare them to each other and see all of their relevant information. This is really nice for looking at your hatch library as a whole, but it also provides great utility for us when we want to go ahead and save our own custom hatches. P-hatch or paint hatch is a really fun tool. It allows you to edit hatch boundaries with brush tools, essentially, sort of like Photoshop uses brushes. So we'll play with that a little bit. Of course, we'll cover the save hatch tool and walk you through that process as well. And the mslide command is what we will be using to shoot a hatch slide. Like previously mentioned, when you save hatch, if you do it properly, you won't need to worry about using mslide to reshoot a slide. But if you don't get the slide looking exactly the way you want it, it's no big deal. You can always just reshoot the slide, and it's not a big process at all. And of course, we'll show you how to delete a hatch. And that one's pretty straightforward and simple. So how to save custom hatches? What does this process look like? I know that some people have been daunted by the documentation because it seems like a lot, but it's not a big deal. It takes a little bit of setup work in the beginning. You have to get everything dialed in, but it's one of those things that you only need to do it once. Once you get your hatch saved in, they're done. It's kind of a set it and forget it type of process. And honestly, it's kind of fun. You get to set your hatches up exactly to your liking. Um, to do this, you first want to begin by backing up your custom hatches. Like anything, you want to set those aside so that you know you have them in their current state and you always have square one. The next thing you want to do is put a copy of those hatches that you intend to save into a specified folder that AutoCAD knows where to look for hatches. By default, you'll have your patterns folder where AutoCAD will look for hatch patterns. You could put them there. But if there's somewhere else, you need to just make sure you add that support file path so that AutoCAD knows where to find them. Then you'll want to run print hatches so that you have the paper space layouts we described. And what you can do then is create a copy of a page and have blank spaces in order to place your hatches that you wish to save. What's really nice about this is it allows you to have the existing hatch library right there at your fingertips for reference. A good example might be if you have a paver hatch you want to place, and you like the scale and size of an existing paver hatch, you have it right there to reference. Once you've placed all of your hatches, you'll want to set their scale and rotation and record all of that so that it's there ready for you to use. And then it's also worth noting that you can save a hatch multiple times, like I explained previously. An example of this might be if you have a rubble hatch and you want a light, medium, and heavy version, you'll place that rubble hatch 3 times and then set it up with the correct scale and rotation settings that you want for each one to represent the light, the medium, and the heavy version. This allows you to use one source pattern file and save it in different configurations in order to create 3 custom hatches. Um, Lastly, you'll want to adjust your window to a 4:3 aspect ratio in order to shoot the best possible slide. That's because when you run the Save Hatch tool, what it's going to do is shoot a slide automatically for you. And the way the system does that is it takes a snapshot of your working window or your working area, and the slides are set at a 4:3 aspect ratio. What we're going to do in our demonstration today is we're going to just blow through that so that we have an obviously bad slide and that you can see how it looks and you can know what to look for when you're at this stage. And then we'll also show you how to reshoot it using that mslide command because it's a very similar process. And then once you have everything set up, you'll go ahead and you'll run the save hatch and you can save your own custom hatches into the system. Like I said, we'll go through the process of how to reshoot a slide. Um, the process is a lot like the save hatch tool. You want to place the save hatch, get it dialed in the way you want it, adjust your window to a 4:3 aspect ratio, and then make sure that you zoom in so that the hatch is filling the screen or that working area. And then if you're not doing the save hatch process, but you're just shooting a slide, all you have to do then is run the mslide command and save that slide. So the reshooting of a hatch slide is very much the same as the ending of saving a hatch. Um, really quick, we're ready to jump into the demonstration. Do we have any initial questions that we need to knock out before we do that?
We've had a few really good questions. I don't think we need to go over them, but love the questions. Just remind people, please keep them coming. I'll continue to answer them while James continues. Yeah, let's keep on rolling.
Sweet, let's jump right in. Okay, so here you can see I have CAD open, but before we do that, let's also take a look at those file structures that we had discussed. Really quick, I just want to run through a couple things to locate the acad.pat file. There's a couple of good little learning tips in case you need to find this. First, you want to start by accessing your local disk. Then you'll go down to your users folder. Then you want to select your username. Then from here, you're going to want to find this app data file. It's worth noting that right here at this stage, this is a hidden file. So if you don't have your settings set to show hidden files, you're not going to be able to find this very easily. So just make sure that you go to your file explorer and you go to options and view and make sure that you have show hidden files selected. You can tell that it's hidden because it's kind of a transparent icon. It's not fully colored. So you want to go into this app data file, then into your roaming, then Autodesk. Then you want to make sure you select the year of CAD that you're using. In my case, this is 2025. You'll have one folder here, this R year number. Then you'll have one folder here, this ENU. And then lastly, you can come down here to support. And here is where the acad.pat file lives. So as you can see, if you're not aware of that file path, it can be really hard to find. I've even tried, searching for it at times, and depending where you are, how far down the file path you got, searching can take quite a while. So it's a little bit tricky to find. But let's just open this up and take a look at what a pattern file is. So when we open this in a text editor, you'll see it's just a bunch of text. Um, One thing to note about pattern files is that an asterisk will signify that the name and description of the hatch is to follow, and everything on the lines below is going to be the numbers that the system uses to generate the hatch. As you can see, something like this is very simple. This solid fill doesn't have much data. Um, But if you were to scroll down and go through some of these, you can see that some of them very quickly get very complicated. This is one of the main reasons why hatches are so incredibly difficult to create. Um, if you don't know how to do these manually, which is very difficult, there are ways you can use a number of different programs, and there are various workflows to simplify the process. But even then, you have other hurdles that you have to overcome. So the takeaway here is that making custom hatch patterns is no simple feat. And we've gone through lots of hard work to create hundreds of them for you guys. But we are always looking to expand the hatch library. So if you have any suggestions or hatches that you would like to see added, don't hesitate to send us over examples. We would love to create new hatches that you guys want. And if there's enough interest, maybe we'll do a future webinar on how to go through some of the workflows to create your own custom hatches. Um, One thing to note here is AutoCAD, if you look at their default documentation, they say that in order to add your own custom hatch patterns, you just come down here and you start copying and pasting them into this single pat file. Um, that's very risky because one typo could mess up your hatch pattern, and it's just kind of a nightmare to deal with. So we're going to urge you not to do that. But that's how AutoCAD deals with the default hatches. Now, on the other hand, let's take a look at how Land Effects handles hatches. So if we come back to our local disk, all we need to do is find our Land Effects folder. From here, it's pretty straightforward. If you open up patterns, you'll see your .pats. Um, if you haven't placed any hatches, don't worry if this folder is empty. These are all cloud-based, so they download on the fly when you place them. As you can see, I've worked with a lot of these, so my patterns folder is pretty full. But don't freak out if you come in here and it's empty. That just means you haven't placed those hatches yet. So this is where the pattern files will live. And as you can see, instead of having a single pattern file, we have individual pattern files for every hatch. Um, if we go back to the land effects folder and we go into the hatch folder, here is where we will find the other resources. So you can see here, I have XML files. I have one for site, ground cover, drip, and detail. And I also have a folder for each hatch library. So I have site, ground cover, drip, and detail. It's worth noting that we highly recommend you don't go in here and mess around with these XMLs. Um, they're just like pattern files where if you make one simple typo or you mess something up, you can create a world of troubleshooting for yourself. Um, there are very few exceptions that we will discuss later when you edit XMLs, but those are going to be more pertaining to user XMLs, which are generated when you save your own custom hatches. If you ever encounter an issue that's related to an XML, you can always rename these to something like .back or .old instead of .xml, and they're cloud-based. It'll pull the new, most current, refreshed XML for you. So if you run into anything, just go ahead and back one of these up, rename it, and then you'll pull the new one. And then if we go into one of these folders for a hatch library, you will see that we have the slide files. These are just like the pattern files. They're stored on the cloud and they're downloaded when you preview a hatch. So if yours are empty, it just means you haven't looked at the hatches yet. So there's no reason to worry if you go in here and this is empty. And then your custom hatch slides, when you create them, will be saved in these libraries as well. So if you've only used default hatches, you haven't saved any customs, you're not going to have any custom slides in here either. So now that we've kind of looked at where all of these resources live and what the folder structure is like, let's hop on over to CAD and see what that looks like. So if you come here to your FX Site tab and you click this drop-down menu where it says Hatch, you will see the primary hatch tools. We have Hatch, Save Hatch, Delete Hatch, and Print Hatches. We'll cover all of these today, but initially let's just go ahead and open the Hatch tool and take a look. Here is the Hatch dialog box. As you can see here, these tabs at the top are representative of our top level hatch library. So we've got detail, drip, ground cover, and site. Then below that, we have subcategories. So we've broken them out further. In this case for site, we have simple, complex, aggregate, and pavers. For any one of these, if there's more hatches than show here on the front page, you can scroll down to see all of the other hatches within this subcategory. A quick little note is that if you're going through here for the first time and these are kind of lagging behind, taking a second to load, that's just because it's downloading the slide file. So when you're seeing these for the first time, it has to grab the slide file. And that'll only happen the first time, and then it'll be more responsive and quick because it already has the information it needs. But definitely urge you to go through here and play around and get familiar with a lot of these hatches. Um, Here is a great example, this wave chip hatch. You can see that it's saved in 4 different versions. So we have 4 rotations of this. Um, this is an example of what I was discussing in the intro where one pattern file can represent multiple hatches in the library. So this wave chip 45, wave chip 90, and wave chip 135, they're all pointing to the same pat file, but the XML is telling the system how to make those variations. Um, so yeah, definitely spend some time clicking through these and checking out all of the pavers, aggregates, all of the variations, go through detail and drip, and just check out what we've got. We've gone through a lot of work to make these. And also send us in any recommendations if you want to hopefully see new ones added. Before we go further down this rabbit hole, let's place a hatch really quick and just kind of compare an AutoCAD hatch and a Land Effects hatch. So I can just type hatch to activate the default AutoCAD command to place a hatch. And you'll see up here at the top, if I open this, I can browse through all of the hatches that it's finding in my patterns folder. It's worth noting that if you add an additional folder to your support file paths, those will show up here as well. But I just have it set to patterns right now. If I wanted to grab, let's say, this ANSI 31 hatch, just a default AutoCAD hatch, and place it, I can do so by selecting a closed area and it'll place. And as you can see, it looks like it placed a solid. That is not a solid. That is actually the ANSI 31 hatch. If I select it here and I can confirm in my properties window. This kind of goes back to what I was discussing in the intro with no standard scale. There's a number of factors that can impact this, but if you have this situation where you place a hatch and it looks like a solid, it's likely just that your scale is much too small. So the pattern is so dense, it's showing up as a solid. The opposite can happen too. If you place the hatch and you only see a few lines in the area or you don't see a hatch at all, that's likely that this hatch scale is way too high. So as you can see here, currently this scale is set to 1. If I bump this way up to something like 35, now the hatch looks more reasonable and like something more that I would expect. So that's just a good example of that sheds light on how there's no standardized scale for these hatches. And when you're placing hatches with the standard AutoCAD tool, it's hard to predict how they're going to appear. There's a bunch of different things that can change how that behaves. Whereas if I come over here to my Land Effects hatch tool again, I can grab this same hatch. I can just scroll down here and grab the same hatch and see 31. And when I place it, it's going to come in automatically scaled. So that is one huge benefit to using the Land Effects hatches. Additionally, I can place more complex hatches and I can also adjust the scale and rotation after they've been placed. So if I grab something way more complex like this fan hatch, I can go ahead and place it. And when I select it, I have control over the scale and the rotation just like I would with any other hatch. So you're not stuck to the default settings with Land Effects hatches by any mean. You still have full control over them. And all of the other tools will work on them as well. So if we wanted to play with something like P hatch, I could just type P hatch and hit enter. And it's going to prompt me in the command line to select a hatch. So if I go ahead and I select this fan hatch, for example, you'll see my cursor has changed to what is a paintbrush. If you've ever worked with Photoshop, this is sort of similar to that. If I overlap this brush on the hatch boundary and I click, it's going to automatically update the boundary to that new shape. And if you take a look down here at the command line again, keyboard commands, that blue K indicates that there's more options for me to use in this tool. So if I press K, it's going to bring up my keyboard commands. So now I have the ability to use A and D to rotate my brush. I can change my brush size. I can press B to access the brush library and choose a different brush. So I'll go ahead and show you that. I can click OK, and while still active in this command, if I press B, for example, I will see my brush library. Here's the default brushes. It's worth noting that we have documentation and I believe a power tip on how to create your own custom brushes if you wanted to, but that's a topic for another day. I can go ahead and choose a new brush if I'd like, and I can rotate it, and I can continue to paint my hatch um, boundary and change it. And this is such a fun tool, and it has a lot of fun utility for things like backfills and details, and you name it. There's a lot of really fun applications for this tool. This will apply to any hatch that you've placed. So go ahead and experiment with that and make some fun hatch boundaries. Um, Another really cool tool that I want to highlight next is going to be print hatches. This is easily accessible by just typing print hatches and pressing enter, and then it's going to open up a dialog box. Quick note here, it gives me the option to select manufacturer hatches. That's only an internal thing for us to set up the manufacturer hatch libraries, but you'll want to choose generic and custom, and then you'll see you can select any of your hatch libraries here. So if you wanted to print your site hatches, for example, you just select it and click OK. I'm not going to do that right now because it takes a minute or so because there's a ton of hatches in that library, but I've already gone ahead and run it ahead of time. Um, when you run print hatches on a library, it'll create layout tabs for all of the hatches. And they look like this. So you can click through and see all of your hatches. Um, what you get on this page is you'll get a preview of the hatch pattern. You'll get the hatch display name. You'll get the hatch pattern name. So this is going to be the name of the pattern file. And then you'll have the scale and the rotation for every hatch. So this is going to be really useful not only to view all of your hatches in one place, but when we get to saving our own custom hatches, this is going to be very useful as well. Again, here you can see more examples, and this is actually a good place to look at it. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 versions of Emerald with various rotations. You can see that they're all pointing to the same source pattern file. They're all set at the same scale. But if you look at them, they all have unique rotations, and therefore they all have unique names. So the cool thing about the LandFX hatch system is it allows you to preset hatches in different configurations for your needs, so you don't have to manually do that every single time you place a hatch. Um, Popping back over to model space, you might have seen in that dialog box that there were manufacturer hatches, and we've had people um, going through the trouble of saving manufacturer hatches as custom hatches, but there's no need. We already have all the manufacturer hatches available as well. So if you open up your ref notes manager, and of course, if you have a project assigned, you'll be able to add a new area. So you can just select area here at the top and then select new. And then here is where you'll have access to not only our generic custom hatches, if you wish to add those with data to your project, but you can also select from a manufacturer hatch. So if I go ahead and select some manufacturer like Unilock, for example, now I have the Unilock hatch paver dialog box. These are going to be organized by type of pavers. So you have interlocking, large, permeable, and so on. And then these slides are a bit different than our land effects slides because we get these from the manufacturer, but typically what they'll show is at least one repetition of the pattern so you can understand what you're looking at. So this one is nice because the pattern fills the entire slide, but they highlight a single full repetition. Of course, you can come down here too and click through all of their various um, a series. These are going to be their series. And if you choose a type, it'll show you the series that applies to that type of paver. So if I wanted to add anchor lock interlocking, all I'd have to do is select it. I get a description here, and I can add this to my project. And I can confirm everything here that I want, and then I can say, okay. I could add a cost and fill all this in if I wanted to. And then that's added to my project. So once it's in my project, I just have to select it and place it, and then I'm off to the races with that hatch as well. So as you can see, um, we have both land effects, custom hatches, as well as the AutoCAD hatches, and we have our manufacturer hatches, and all of these can be used together. Um, Moving on from hatch tools, before we do that and we start working on saving some hatches, do we have any questions regarding any of the basic hatch placement or hatch tools?
You are getting incredible feedback. Everybody loves the manufacturer hatches, and we've had a couple of people have mentioned that they're having some hatch scaling or hatch fragmenting. The best solution for that, of course, is just to manually reinstall the hatch library, but also to send the drawing in to us so we can, make sure it's not something wrong with the hatch itself. Yeah, classic example: if you're having a problem and you don't tell us, there's no way for us to know. So there's nothing wrong with go ahead and sending it in to us so that we're at least aware and we can see if it is a problem or if it is on something with the drawing or something with a hatch or etc. But I was able to get all those little questions answered, of course. But so please keep them coming and keep on going, James.
Awesome. That actually brings a little side note into my mind that I had not planned. But
Hmm.
if you're having hatch fragmentation issues and you want to do a little troubleshooting, one good hint that we have discovered is if you go to your land effects patterns folder or locate anywhere that the hatch pattern that you're having issues with is, um, if it's a fragmenting hatch, a good indicator, it's not 100%, but a good indicator would be to find the hatch pattern and take a look at the file size. Oftentimes, I've found that hatches that have a large file size, 100 plus KBs, that's usually a decent indicator of the hatch having issues with fragmenting. So um, you could always mention that to us too if you're having issues with a specific hatch. Take a look at that file size, and that is a good clue. It's not 100% always the case, but if you are having a fragmentation issue and you see that that pattern file has a huge file size, likely that's related to the problem. Okay, so let's go on to how to save your own custom hatches. Okay, so you've got your hatches backed up, and now you're ready to save them into our hatch library. The first thing you want to do is make a copy of your backup and put those in a location that AutoCAD has access to. So you could throw them right into your patterns file, or if you have them saved somewhere else, you can open up your options dialog box, come over here to your files tab and open up the support file search path. And as you can see, patterns is already down here. But if you add that custom location here, then AutoCAD will know where to look for your hatches. Um, Once you've done that, you'll want to run print hatches. In this case, I have site hatches set up here ready to go. Um, if you wanted to do site hatches yourself, you would just type print hatches, select the site library, and hit OK. Give it a minute or so, let it run and generate all these pages automatically for you, and then you would be here. Um, what you want to do is go to the last page. So in this case, page 7, this coincidentally landed on a full page. Depending on which hatch library you run and how many hatches are in there, it could end on a partial page. Um, but ultimately, what you want to do is create empty spaces for you to place your new hatches. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this entire page here. Um, I'm going to say make a copy, and I'm going to put it at the end. Now I have my new page down here. I'm just going to rename this so it doesn't get confusing to site hatch page number 8. And now I have a duplicate page I can work with. Quick note here is print hatches will potentially explode the hatch in this um, preview, creating line work. Um, Lucky for us, we want to get rid of all these, and those will be the only lines on the page because as you can see, every other element on this page is going to be a polyline or a block or text. So I'm just going to use my quick select tool by typing QQ, and I'm going to tell it to grab all of the lines on this page, and I'm going to say OK, and I can just delete it. And now I have a page of empty spaces to add my new hatches. Um, you're going to want to create enough empty spaces to accommodate all of the hatches that you want to save. Um, you want to be really careful here because if you do what I did and you duplicated, you're going to have the existing information from the hatches that were placed. So you're going to want to take care to replace these accordingly. So once you've got your template page set up, ready to work with, now you want to use the AutoCAD hatch tool to place your hatches in these corresponding places. So if I type hatch, it's going to then open up the hatch patterns I have in my patterns folder. And I'll be able to expand this here when it's done thinking. And I'll be able to pick any hatch, even if it's already a Land Effects hatch or an AutoCAD hatch. And I'll be able to save it as my own. So if I take this angle hatch here, what I want to do is place it here. And once it's placed, I want to go ahead and set this up the way I want it. So I have full control over the scale. And I want to point out again, this one was a 0.6 scale. So you can see how this scale was already different from that ANSI 31 hatch we placed in the beginning, which had a scale of 1. So these scales for pattern files can be all over the place. So what I want to do now is set up the scale that I want. Let's say I want this to be, I don't know, 0.8. And then I can play with the rotation by moving this slider to play with it manually, or I can type in a value of rotation that I'd like. Let's do 45. Okay, so let's say that is how I want this hatch. Next thing I want to do is record the pertinent information here below the hatch. It's important that while you go through this process, you take care to do this accurately because you should probably save this for future reference and you don't want to accidentally have a discrepancy when you place the hatch and wonder why it's different from how you set it up. So let's note the pattern file name first. So if I have this hatch selected and I look at my properties tab, you can see I have the pattern name here is angle. So let's go ahead and fill that in here. I can just double click this text and change this to angle. This is always going to be the pattern file name there. Next, I want to give it a display name. So this is what I want the pattern to be named when I see it in the library. So if I wanted to call this one Open Brick 45, for example, I could do so. While we're talking about naming hatches, all land effects hatches adhere to a strict naming convention. So we have a alphanumeric prefix and then the following pattern name. We've set this up so that there's gaps between the numbering and between the lettering so that if you choose to, you could follow along with our naming convention and fit them in. But you definitely don't have to. You can name them whatever you want. You could adhere to your own naming convention, or you could just make it up as you go. It's whatever you want to do. But we need to give it a display name. We need to record the pattern name, and now we need to record the scale and rotation. So if you forget what it is, just select your hatch and you can confirm up here. So this one had a scale of 0.8. So I'll just go ahead and record that. And then this one also had a rotation of 45. So then once you have that all set up the way you want it, and you do that for all of your patterns, you're ready to begin saving them. Now, typically the next stage would be to adjust your window in order to shoot a good slide. What the system will do is it'll take this entire working area and it'll create the slide. So there's a few different ways you can resize this to be the correct aspect ratio. You could, drag your panel or your palette over in order to create the size that you want, or you could physically minimize this window and resize the entire thing. Um, but we'll get to that in a little bit. First, let's just go ahead and save this one as is so that we can better look for a poor hatch slide. So when you have your hatch ready to save, you just want to come back up to the top Save Hatch tool and choose the Save, or the Hatch dropdown rather, and choose the Save Hatch tool. From here, always refer to your command line. It's going to prompt you to select a hatch. So we'll just highlight the one that we want. And then we're going to see this dialog box asking us to specify which library we want to save it to. So in this case, we're working on site hatches. We're going to go ahead and select site and say OK. And then we get the save hatch dialog box here. So up here at the top, this is always going to be the pattern file name, the .pat name, which in this case was angle. As you can see, we recorded it here. In this image, this is going to be your slide. So as you can see, this slide is not the most useful. It's got the entire work area that we have behind. For the description, this is where you want to put the hatch display name. So we called this one Open Brick 45. And you'll see here that it automatically, when we selected the hatch, grabbed the scale and rotation values for us. So you don't want to change them here. If you set it up correctly on the page, it's going to pull those for you. So that's nice. The last thing you can add is if you want to add a layer here, that'll dictate what layer the hatch is placed on when you use it. I'm going to recommend you just leave this blank and run with defaults. But if you decide you want to go down that route, you can play with that. So then all you have to do is say OK, and now your hatch is saved. So if I come back up here to my hatch library and I go to my site tab, you'll see now I have this user tab here. This is going to be initially where all of your hatches are saved by default. As you can see, we have our poor slide here. Doesn't look very good at all. But despite having a bad preview slide, the hatch will still place and function the way we set it. So I can place it in paper space. I could come over here and I could place it in model space if I'd like. I can use the D command to select draw an area for my hatch using the blue keyboard shortcut down here. And you'll see my hatch comes in at those settings that I specified. Now let's take another look at the hatch library here. You might see that it's in this user file. If you want to change this, you have control over customizing the subcategory tabs. I just want to urge you to use caution. This is one of those rare exceptions where you can go in and play with the XML file. But be very careful. To make a point more clear, let's go ahead and save one more hatch. So when we do that, I can make another point. So we'll just place another hatch to save. Let's say we want to add this ARB88 hatch. Here, it came in at a large scale. So I'm going to want to select this and dial this one way back. Let's see what it looks like at 0.9. Let's just play with this until it looks good. Why is it not changing? Huh, that one's not playing right.
I've noticed that a lot of times with hatches, I have to change the pattern and then change the pattern back to get a scale change to be reflected.
Huh, I don't know why it's doing that. Here, I know. I'll just resave this one with a different configuration.
There you go.
So I'll make this one large and I'll change the rotation back to 0. Now I can do save hatch again, and I can save this one. I should probably just follow best practices and name this one large paver. change this to angle because it uses the same pat. And then what were my stats here? I had a scale of 1.5 and I had a rotation of 0. So then I can go ahead and save this one, and I can save it as a site hatch. And again, description is going to be the display name. So I saved this one as large paver. And I have my scale and rotation pulled for me. Okay, so now if I come back to my hatch tool under my user file, uh, I'll have both of these here. If I wanted to customize that, I could come back to my my folder structure. I could go to local disk, land effects, hatches, and now you'll see I have my user XMLs here. So what I want to do is I want to find my user site XML because those were saved in the site library, and I can open it. And now you'll see in the XML I have both of my hatches listed. This is where you need to be very careful. If you find this row called filter, between the two arrows here, you'll see I have this use 0-user. What that is the the folder here in CAD. So that represents this tab here, user. Now, if I want to change this, I can. The 0- is what's going to determine the order. So the order of the tabs, user by default is in the front, so that's 0. If I wanted to move that in the order I could give it something like Z dash, and then I could name this folder whatever I want, or name this folder whatever I want. So let's say this one was called Open Brick 45. I could put this in a folder called Office Standard maybe. But I have to change this for every hatch in this XML. So if I want all of my hatches to land in this exact folder, it would probably be wise to save all of my hatches first and then do a find and replace, find 0-user and replace it so that it does them all in one. But if I wanted to customize this and fuss around with it further, I could also have another one that's called 0-custom pavers that I want at the front. Um, and again, you need to use the utmost caution when you're in here editing these XMLs. It's really easy to make a typo and mess something up. But if you change this block filter line and you change only the space between the arrows, you can control that file structure in CAD. So if I go ahead and I say save, I can close this. And if I reopen my hatch tool, you'll see now I have custom pavers with the one that I saved. And I also have office standards with my open brick 45. So you might want to take care and do that very carefully and go through them methodically. Don't rush through that stage. Now, real quick, while we still have time, let's fix these ugly slides. So let's fix open brick 45. This process might vary depending on your setup. Some of us are running large monitors, 2 monitors, laptop, you name it. Everybody's setup's going to be slightly different. My favorite method is to minimize the window here so that I can just control this entire window. And then I do something that's super high tech and I take a ruler, or in my case right now, a measuring tape, and I just hold it up to my screen. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to stretch this work area to be 4, and then I want it to be 3 tall. So let me go ahead and stretch this. And that's about right. So that's about a 4x3 in my case. Next, what I want to do is make it so the hatch pattern fills the entire screen. What I've found works pretty well is to do a zoom object. So type Z for zoom and then O for object and select the bounding line and hit enter. And that's going to get me really close. And then I just use my scroll wheel to go in one more zoom and it fills it nicely. When I have this looking the way I want it, I can then come back up to my hatch, drop down on the FX site tab, and I can click, oh, I'm sorry. That's how you would save the hatch. I can just type mslide. And what it's going to do is it's going to ask me to specify where I want to save this. So if I go to my local disk and I go to my land effects folder and I go in here to hatch and site, I want to save it in here. Because we already ran save hatch and we have a bad slide, what we want to do is just go down. These are going to be alphabetical, so I'm looking for O, and I want to select the existing one that's bad. And when I save this, I want to make sure that I say yes to replace it. So what I can do is save it like that. And now if I go back to my hatch library and I go to my open brick, I have a nice clean slide here. Um, so again, if you're going to do this correctly the first time, while you're saving all of your hatches in, before you run the save hatch tool, you're going to want to resize your window. But if you do it incorrectly or you're slightly off and your slide has margins or something left in it, you just have to resize the window and then run the mslide command, and it's as easy as that. Um, Last thing, if you want to delete a hatch, so let's go here and say that we actually don't want this large paver hatch anymore. It's really easy. All you have to do is click the hatch drop-down menu, select the delete hatch button, and then it's going to ask you to specify the hatch. And you can see you can only delete user hatches or your own custom hatches. So if we navigate to where that site paver lives, all you have to do is select it and say OK. And it's going to ask you to confirm. We want to say yes. And now that hatch is gone. It's no longer there. And since it was the only hatch in that subfolder, the subfolder is gone as well. So you can always confirm by coming back over here to your site, your local disk land effects hatch site library, and you'll notice that the slide for that hatch we deleted no longer exists. So the best way to remove hatches is to use the delete hatch tool because it'll pull all of the stuff out of the back end as well. Whereas if you just remove the pattern file or something, it might still show up in the Hatch Explorer, but you're going to run into issues if you try to use it. I know that was kind of a mouthful. Do we have any questions or anything we want to address with our last few minutes here?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's just this. I think this one won the award for the most questions. Really great interest. Of course, it just definitely shows how well, wasn't that just what I was saying? How important that hatches are to our discipline. I think the most common one was just reminding them of the manual hatch installation. So to download our updated hatch patterns manually, you can grab that from the website. That's just a very good troubleshooting trick. What happens is when you access our hatch library, like that dialog box right there, certainly if it doesn't look like what you're seeing there, if we had a couple people who didn't have the simple complex aggregate little buttons there. That's a great reason to go and manually download it. It's supposed to automatically check approximately every 30 to 60 days and automatically download the latest. But if it hasn't for whatever reason, you can just simply go to the website and search for that. Or of course, just ask us. Submit a tech support ticket. We'll tell you. We love easy tech support tickets like that, where you just go, "Yep, that one's right here." That was definitely the most common one I got. Basically, the second most common was just if you're having a hatch issue, had a couple people saying they're having scaling issues with hatches, and it happens every time on every schedule. Well, I didn't know that. How would I know that? You have to let us know. So you have to just submit a tech support ticket, and we will absolutely get that taken care of because obviously the system does work. It does scale hatches correctly. So if you're seeing a situation where it's not, you got to let us know, pretty please, and we'll get you rolling right along. And I think that pretty much covers the most of it. Like I said, I mean, we got 24 questions in here. I think it definitely sets a new record. So thank you guys so much for all that. We were chatting before about some ideas for another hatch-related webinar. Now I definitely know it would be definitely appreciated just seeing this interest level. So stay tuned for that. Otherwise, everybody, guess what? We've reached the end. It's time for you to go and enjoy this fabulous, fabulous weather and have a wonderful weekend. And we'll catch you next time.